Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, and regulatory landscape and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site is Tina Wang, Divisional Vice President of Human Resources at Nasdaq-listed ADP, as well as Sina Chehrazi, founder and CEO of NAYYA. We're here to discuss the future of benefits and shifting expectations with a multi-generational workforce, which of course is such an important topic, Tina, as you think about remaining competitive for so many different verticals competing for the same kind of talent. So when you think about attracting and retaining them, how would you describe the ways how you're seeing worker expectations shift today?
We're seeing a lot of different things happen with workers' expectations, and one of them really being around, the first being around pay expectation. And not just pay expectation as you think about base salary, but the whole inclusive total compensation package around base salary and benefits today. The second piece is around career progression, and a lot of workers today are looking for more job security. And within that, an organization in which they can grow their career within. And then the third is flexibility. As we know, as a result of the pandemic, that really came out in terms of being able to, for someone to be able to balance their personal commitments as well as being able to work where they want to and how they want to.
And Sina, how are these shifts influencing the way workers and human resources practitioners, how they're approaching benefits?
Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful to be here with you, Jill, on Trade Talks, and with such an incredible company like ADP. Gosh, change is such a constant these days. It was during the pandemic, it was afterwards. We really see benefits, whether people realize it or not. We're talking about 30% of comp in the United States now, which is crazy. I mean, we're talking about $10.5 trillion in wages paid, so we're talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of benefits. We're seeing two really main sort of focus areas right now. One is, we call them the two Ps. One is personalized. Employers, HR practitioners, they're trying to say, hey, how do I make these benefit plans come to life? It's almost like Christmas decorations but without the lights turned on sometimes. And so how do I sort of do that? Second one is proactive. People work all week for these benefits. Employers work so hard to provide these benefits. And so how do you actually get the benefits working for us instead of just working for our benefits? And so these are a couple of the things that we're seeing practitioners and others really kind of take on as we look to the present and the future.
So Tina, what criteria should employers consider when they're putting together these benefits offerings?
So one is definitely in terms of making sure you're market competitive, right? Like making sure not just overall market competitive, but are you competitive within your industry? Are you competitive geographically as well? And so leveraging benchmarking data that we have from an ADP perspective, from an organization and employee perspective will help with that. The second piece is really around the company culture. So if you think about a little bit of what Sina said earlier around personalization, things like that, a company can actually go out and share a little bit more about their culture. And so as an example, if a company goes and says, I offer employee assistance programs, things like that are non-traditional benefits, that actually signals to prospective candidates or employees that they value, that the company values, the opportunity to give personal support resources to the organization and to their employees.
So, Sina, when it comes to things like benefits, larger companies have teams of HR professionals, people teams, and so forth. So for smaller and mid-sized companies, what can HR leaders do to improve their benefits process and remain competitive in the market with, versus larger companies?
You're absolutely right. I mean, the Fortune 1000 have incredible, phenomenal teams of people who can sort of reassess and assess and take surveys. But small businesses, like, let's think about the advantages we've got. I run a 160-person company here in New York City, and one thing is it's really easy to bring people together and get the pulse of the company. It's hard when you have 40,000 employees to get everybody into one room and say, what's important right now? What's important to you? And so that communication burden is totally different for smaller businesses than it can sometimes be for larger companies. The second thing is we see smaller businesses really starting to push the envelope in benefits technology because, and I hate to say it, but there's just frankly not as much red tape in terms of trying new things, whether it's, of course, topic du jour, AI, or other sort. How do we sort of start sampling and trying and experimenting and innovating and bringing this in to how we sort of operate, and doing so without maybe it taking 2 or 3 years to sort of analyze? And so we see sort of adoption of technology, the latest technologies being sort of an advantage that small businesses are taking on. And the second one is just the tightness of a 50, 100, 150 person company in terms of being able to sort of continuously iterate. We see those as two incredible advantages for smaller businesses.
But you have the ability to be nimble, right?
Correct.
So Tina, let's talk about the multi-generational workforce. I'm reading here, 5, soon to be 6 generations in the workforce. And we are multi-generational, right? There are a number, whether it's Gen Z, Gen X, perhaps even baby boomer for people who want to work longer. How are those dynamics impacting the workforce?
So I know we talk a lot about generations and all the different characteristics that a generation brings. However, I probably would go with a little bit of what my colleague has said that I've worked with that says about life stages, because each generation actually goes through different life stages, whether it's deciding to go back to school, whether it's having a baby or buying a house. All of those moments that matter, that are there, every generation goes through. So if a company, regardless of small, medium, or large, has the ability to offer benefits that can support those, whether it's tuition assistance or childcare resources or partnerships with a mortgage or realtor, like all of those actually help in terms of helping provide different types of benefits to the generations.
Sina, this sounds a bit overwhelming to me. We would have personalized everything, and with the multi-generational workforce, what tools are needed to empower HR professionals as well as employees in terms of being able to execute on these benefits and make the best decisions for themselves?
I love what you mentioned earlier, and I think the question is right on point. Moments that matter. What we can see in the data now more than ever, whether it's a small business we discussed earlier or a large company, in those moments that matter, those life changes, what employees are looking for is what they call employee care from their employers. That's when they want their benefits to show up. That's when they want those, benefits are like the most human parts of work in a way. So we're seeing two things happen. First one is, you need to be investing in sort of the latest employee benefits technology, stuff that brings or can bring for employees all of their data into one place. And so that whether you're 22, perhaps this is your first job out of school, or you're perhaps at a later stage in your career, as you're going through getting married, as you're going through having your firstborn, as you're going through preparing for retirement, as you're going through, all of that data can work together, and you can sort of be confronted. I mean, imagine a world, it's here, where you say, hey, this is where you are in your life. Here's a benefit that matters to you. Here's a benefit that can sort of have an impact on your life this week. The technology is now here, and so we see the market adopting it. And I think if you think about a future where you can just go through your life and your benefits are working for you in the background, that's a pretty exciting place to be.
It's such a great point that you make, because whether you're a recent grad or you're having a baby, those life stages, it's not just specific to grads that are coming out of school and, oh, what do I do now? But Tina, let's focus on recent grads for a moment here. They're going to be choosing their benefits for the first time. A lot of these terms are going to be unfamiliar, so how can employers help to set them up for success?
Yeah, most recent graduates coming out of school don't know anything about benefits. And by the way, like, I'm 20 years in the workforce and I still get confused in terms of understanding those benefits. And I think it's really important for organizations to provide that education. And I'll just, if I could just give you a little bit of an example. Actually, when I first started, I got an apartment. I was, I got my first job, my first paycheck, and when I signed up for my benefits, I was like, whatever I can do to save a couple dollars so I can go hang out with my friends, things like that, I would. And I decided not to sign up for long-term disability. And I didn't know enough about it. And what happened was, a couple years later, I got into a car accident. And with that, like, if I had known what a couple dollars in my paycheck, taken out to cover that, it probably saved me a lot of grief if I understood it. So companies have such an opportunity to provide education around what's relevant and how does it impact that personalization. And the other thing I would say is, most graduates are probably on plans that their parents set up for them. And so they may not be on the right plans either. And so if an organization has the ability to have one-on-one conversations or information sessions, things like that, to help them really figure out what's right for them, that personalization, because benefits are so personal to the individual.
Yeah. And I'm glad, well, not that I'm glad, but I'm glad that you shared that story with us, because when you're in your 20s and you're out of school, you're living your best life.
That's right.
YOLO. You're not thinking in those terms. I mean, even, okay, maybe I'll defer my 401k because I really want to afford this nice apartment, but we know the power of compounding interest, so that, it's something similar to it. So, Sina, any thoughts on how tech can help recent grads and younger workers?
So younger workers, we've all been there, they're by definition the least experienced when it comes to selecting their benefits. However, today what we're seeing is they're the most advanced when it comes to technology. In our data, and we serve now millions of different employees, we've seen that actually over 95% of Gen Z would rather work with technology to figure out some of these life questions now than meet with someone one-to-one. And so we really believe that this silver bullet, it's not quite a silver bullet necessarily, but the silver bullet here is having a technology presentation delivered approach for these new hires now, where they can interact with benefits the same way they interact with, by the way, the entire rest of their life, whether it be their online life, their Amazon shopping for their benefits, if we can call it that, should be as similar as possible to how they do shopping for pretty much everything else out there, right?
So Tina, when you think about educating the workforce in its entirety, would you also go along with a similar type of approach, more hands-on, if you will?
It's a combination of both, right? The technology, we can't live without our phones today, right? And everything is very simple. Even if Sina's talked about Amazon, like you just kind of go through and purchase. I would say it's a combination of different ways to communicate, right? The tech has to be simple, the tech has to be easy to navigate and easy to understand. The information has to be simple and easy to understand because benefits can be very complicated to understand. So whatever ways, whether it's through the technology, through one-on-ones, if maybe a mix between hybrid tech and online, right? Like there's all these different ways, but as long as it's comprehensive, it's easy to get to, it's simple to understand, and it's relevant to the individual, like they understand why, like what's the WIFM, right? What's in it for me? That's the most important.
What about open enrollment? I can't tell you how many people I've heard, oh my gosh, I forgot about open enrollment, or I didn't see the message for it, or what do I do now? You know, how do you make sure that there is consistent adoption by employers to make sure employees are, you know, up to date with this?
Well, we see three things. First is being early in terms of communicating open enrollment to employees is more important, especially, and we saw that during the pandemic, right? The need to just sort of communicate early and often, hey, this is what's coming, these are what's on offer, this is what the choices are. The second one is we see a lot of different, whether it be multimedia or content or bite-sized stuff or push notifications or decision support technologies that can come in and say, hey, look, you've got 2 weeks to make this decision, but we're going to make it slightly less stressful for you this year. And then the third thing is, and you know, Tina mentioned culture earlier on, like being able to think thoughtfully around, hey, these are the 1 or 2 new things that we want to really highlight that sort of like reminds our employees, like, this is how we do things at ABC Company, and this is what we've invested in. And by the way, we heard you. Those are those, again, moments that matter in a different way to sort of really take open enrollment, which is something that's a little stressful, and almost turn it into like an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the future of benefits for a moment here, Tina, but there are a lot of nuances in terms of what people want, and you know, on a relative basis, what's important to you versus what's important to me. You know, whether you're Gen Z or someone who's later in Gen X, the priorities are different. How do you, as a company, especially one like ADP, where I mean, you have thousands of people in the workforce, how do you make those decisions in terms of this is what we're going to offer, this is going to benefit the most out of all the ADP employees?
So it's really about talking to the people, right? Like it's talking to your employees of the organization, and Sina kind of said it, like it's the company culture, and listening to what's important, you know, so if tuition reimbursement is something that we want to see, like we have a voice in the organization to share that feedback and to talk through it and make a decision on whether or not it works for the organization or not, and if it's for the good of all, right, or some, or a little, like it's really discussed, right, in terms of those conversations and making a decision of what meets best for the most.
Right, so when you think about the future of benefits, do you think it's still going to incorporate that? And then what about emerging technologies in terms of helping you make better data-defined decisions?
Yeah, so technology is definitely going to play a huge part, right? And Sina mentioned a lot of that as well. Like it's definitely going to make things hopefully easier in terms of how to navigate that. From a future perspective, I would definitely say to continue listening to the employees of the organization because they're closest to what's changing, what's shifting, what the needs are as well, regardless of generation. You know, like you'll hear that throughout. Legislation is another area, like whether it's new legislation or changing legislation, keeping close to that in terms of what that means for an organization is important. We already talked about tech, and I would also say data, you know, that leveraging data and analytics and making those decisions is also very important because you have that, you know, I'll say more factual information to be able to make those decisions.
And Sina, to wrap up here, any future trends in your line of sight we should be aware of?
Yeah, what AI, both generative and non-generative, are going to do is in the next 3 or maybe 4 years, this space is just going to be unbelievably, we mentioned personalization, but unbelievably more automated. Jill, you can imagine a version of the world where you work for a wonderful employer and you get a notification that says, Jill, you know, you and your family have spent X on healthcare in the last few years. The prescription drugs cost this much under this plan, this much under this plan. Anyway, bottom line is we've picked these plans for you. Would you like to learn more, or would you like us to just automatically sort of process those things? And then you can go along your life and just, again, the benefit plans will reach out and say, hey, we've been checking in the background, you're actually owed $700 from this one policy. Why don't you push this button and let's get that money in the household? Or do you want to put it into a 529 plan? Benefits now, what we're going to start to see now, and really over the next 36 months or so, is just an incredible amount of automation. And as a result of some of these emerging technologies, the consumer experience for employee benefits for not just our children, but for us is going to be incredibly different 4 and 5 years from now than anything we've experienced over the last 40 or 50 years. And that's exciting.
Well, which is encouraging because sometimes, you know, I've been working for a number of decades, and when you get the open enrollment notices, sometimes I'm like, I think everything remains the same. Nothing's really changed in my life, so I think that would be helpful in terms of these are the nuances and where you can make the savings, or you know, you're getting to, you know, this amount of working years, perhaps you want to up this or up that, and I think that's also some of the challenges with open enrollment where it's overwhelming. I don't even know what to do, so I'll just check this box so that I have insurance. That's right. So automation, certainly for sure. All right, I appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.